Up, AG?
Going.
Life in the East Bay.
It's trying to get warm. Still
It's
cold.
warm now. I'm out and back of my house in San Francisco. It's great.
Berkeley's starting to warm up pretty heavily at this point, I'd say. But
Yeah,
this
we're
time
getting a
this
little
time
bit
of
of
day is
warmth.
this time of day is the best for my window right now. Between 10 and like 12, I get a tiny sliver of light coming in through this window. So, all right, almost there. 1 minute.
Oh, never mind.
Oh, never mind. Okay.
I do that a lot. I have like a thought, and then I realize that it's like either really dumb or really violent. So I just, yeah. Never
Okay.
mind.
You know, Brennan, there's a fine line between clever and stupid.
Many of
It's like the joke. What's the difference between someone who's eccentric and someone who's insane?
what?
$1 million.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty good. Actually, that's not bad.
That's actually very germane right now.
More like several $1 million, but yeah, good enough.
Well, nowadays, yeah.
Yeah, nowadays.
Actually, if you saw Saturday Night Live, you'd know that.
All right. Okay, well, it's 11 o'clock. I guess we can kind of get ourselves started.
Cool.
Okay, so welcome indeed to the Game Audio Institute's SpeedRun talks. This is the first of many that we will be giving in the next few weeks, months, whatever. And our special guest this time, and basically, the whole point of this thing is basically we're going to talk a little bit about, together a little bit about people's own sort of background, kind of how they got into game audio and things like that, and also just discuss a little bit about some of the realities of what it's like to be a game audio professional, what it really means on a day-to-day basis, what do you get to do on a day-to-day basis, things like that. And a lot of times, we've come to expect certain kinds of things just from generally hanging around people at, possibly trade shows or other things like that. And then they sort of say all of these fantastic things about middleware and how it's awesome and solves all your problems. You don't have to learn anything. Except the middleware, and so we just wanted to sort of address some of those issues from the aspect of somebody who's literally like in the trenches, and so our special guest today will be not will be that's in the future, Brennan Anderson, who is
Yeah, we got some new people showing up, by the way.
Yep, no worries. I don't have to let them in, they're just letting themselves in. So basically what we have is the situation where Brennan is now working for Crystal Dynamics, and prior to that, he worked at Pure Mind as a producer, and then Disney Interactive as a composer, or what?
Yeah, so all of my roles were mixed between sound design, implementation, and music.
Yeah, got it.
And they had different titles, so I've just started saying audio designer.
Just audio designer, yeah.
All of it, yeah.
Encompasses all that sort of stuff. So anyway, so yeah, we'll just welcome Brennan to this sort of situation, and I guess just to bring people up to speed, and stuff. Give us a little thumbnail sketch of kind of your background, where you came from, and how you got into game audio.
So I originally came from, actually this is kind of a funny little entrance into the industry. So I lived in Austin, Texas. I grew up there, and I actually knew in high school I wanted to do game audio, and so I had like called around to different people who my parents knew, who might have been tangentially related to the industry, and somehow I don't exactly. It was through. I think my mom had worked with someone who ran a multimedia casino game company, and I was introduced to his son, and he introduced me to George Sanger.
The Fat Man, awesome.
Yeah, So who I didn't know at the time, but his studio was on the street that I lived on.
Okay, so just a little bit of a background, because I think something should be said about this man. He is kind of a legend in the game audio industry. He's been around and done, like, games, sound for pinball games and things like this, and really old 8-bit games and things like that. I don't even remember all the ones that he's got credit. You probably know more than I
Like
do.
Seventh Guest,
Seventh Guest and stuff like that.
he was like one of the first people who I think his team figured out how to use MIDI for audio in games.
Yeah.
So his studio was on my street, and I didn't even know that. I just knew that, we would drive down the road and see this Rolls Royce with Longhorns on the front. And I was like, oh, that's weird, but not too weird for Austin. And so when he invited me over, I went there. I was like, what? It's crazy. So we got to talking, and he introduced me to Exact, actually, because I was telling, I think Wise might have been a thing already, but like it was very early. So I was telling him like how I wanted to do all this stuff with dynamic music and stuff like that. And he's like, well, you got to download Exact and you can author that kind of stuff and blah, blah,
Right.
blah.
So Exact was a middleware tool that existed for Xbox 360.
Yeah.
It is no longer, it is defunct at this point in time, but
Yeah.
it was very well regarded by the people who were used it. It was simple, but it was also very flexible.
Yeah. So I actually remember using Exact, but not being able to like hook it to any game because I didn't have a game.
Right.
I didn't have a 360 developer kit or anything. It was just weird, like just kind of intro to implementation.
Yeah.
But from there, I, kept learning about game audio. Eventually went to school for game audio at Pyramind, where it's just where I met Scott and Steve. And at that point, I had started to learn programming as well, and used that to kind of inform some of my design choices. After Pyramind, I pretty quickly got a job at Disney. And one of the reasons they hired me was because I knew how to use middleware. Not just Wise, but we were also using Fabric at the time, which was like one of the first ones that I learned from Scott and Steve.
Yeah, and Fabric was actually something that was out there, that is still out there, that actually does middleware functionality directly inside Unity. That's where it kind of cut its teeth. They're trying to make a new version that will work with all kinds of game engines at this point in time. But in the previous iteration, the current iteration, I should say, the 2.0 version, it basically runs directly in Unity. So if you're comfortable working in Unity, you can basically do middleware actions directly inside Unity without having to use a separate middleware application to do so. And it's got some drawbacks and benefits either way, but it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I came in and we set up everything with Fabric, and we actually transitioned the audio team from just being people who made the audio and threw it to the engineers to the people who would actually implement it themselves.
Right.
And then, so I was doing sound design, implementation, and eventually music for them as well. And I think I worked on like 30 plus games. I think maybe 30 of them were released.
Yeah.
There are a lot more that weren't because we're mostly doing mobile games at the time.
Yeah, right.
I think there's one or two console games, but
so what was the general like say development period time on a mobile title, like generally?
At least for the audio side, about 6 months. I think the actual time increased a bit for other teams, but
so you were doing multiple titles at a time if you were doing 6 months, because you were not at Disney for
yeah. So it was like 6 to 9 months per title, and I was doing at least like 3 to 5 titles at once, and then a lot of them were cut short because they either got canceled or whatever. So I was there for 3 years. So yeah, 4 or 5 at a time at least. God, there were so many like prototypes going on.
Right.
And then because we also tried to service, we were kind of a centralized service. So at first we were specifically in Disney Interactive, which was originally Disney Mobile, and it changed names several times. But then we got centralized into, central team, and we started helping them, but also Disney Publishing, and then like several other Disney kind of offshoots, not companies, but segments.
Yeah.
So we did that for about 3 years, and then I went to PeerMind to instead of PeerMind's where I went to school, but they also had a production company.
Yeah, they're a studio as well, and they do game production.
Yeah, so I went there and started doing music and sound design implementation for. We started on VR games, and did a couple VR games, couple indie games there. And then after, I think it was like 2 years, almost a year and a half, 2 years, I went and up. Well, I'd already moved up. Then I moved over to Crystal Dynamics.
South.
Yeah, so I went down a little
Yeah.
south to Redwood City.
Yeah.
Then there I started working on Avengers, and it was an incredibly different experience. One thing I remember thinking is that the position was not like high. It wasn't like an entry level position. Like it wasn't billed as like associate or whatever, but the position I had was entry level in terms of AAA, just because, you know, I had never really experienced anything like AAA before, and the work was a lot of the same stuff, but it was differently structured, and there was so much more of it.
Yeah.
That had I not had the experience of being in the industry for 4.5, 5 years,
Yeah,
it would have been really, really hard to jump into this kind of role.
right.
And that was one of the things that struck me. And so we were working on Avengers. And so I've been on that for 3 years. I just recently moved off of Avengers onto another project that is unannounced. So we still have some people working on the DLC for Avengers and stuff like that, but I'm on to a new thing.
Oh, cool.
But still at Crystal Dynamics. So
cool. Wow. All right. So that's very cool. So yeah. So basically the format of this that we're going to basically deal with is that, you know, we'll just sort of we're batting around a few questions and things like that. We're going to open it up, you know, halfway through or something like that, and then we can start taking questions from anyone else. So, you know, get your questions ready for sure, because we're definitely going to check that out and see what we can, see if we can help you guys answer some questions about, you know, generally, you know, things and stuff like that. So I would say, I think one of the things that would be good would be like, you know, everybody, well, I wouldn't say everybody knows, but, you know, it's like to say this, that everybody knows that, but it's not necessarily always true. But usually the deal is that if game audio people are people who are interested in game audio or trying to say, okay, what are the skills I need to have, blah, blah, blah. Everybody knows you need to be good with a DAW, right? Okay, fine. You need to know middleware. That's fine too, right? So beyond those two, which is the typical things that they always say, got to be good with DAW, got to be good with middleware. What other skills would you say are kind of vital to being in this industry that, you know, say top 3 that you wouldn't normally expect?
Yeah. I would say they're kind of soft skills. But they're incredibly important. So it's, one second, let me turn this off. It's a laser for my cat.
Okay.
So the biggest one is kind of being able to make friends and just be friendly and have interpersonal skills with people, because you're going to be talking to a lot of people, just like on a daily basis. And so if you don't know how to, you know, solve problems with other people and collaborate, you're not gonna do incredibly well in a company.
It's a team sport, basically.
Yeah, it's definitely a team sport. Kind of the next level down from that is having an attitude of wanting to learn things.
Yeah.
Because let's just pretend that you know every single thing there is to know about audio and about how DAWs work and about how Wise works or whatever middleware you're using. And there's no information left for you to learn there.
Right.
You're still not probably going to be able to make audio for a game very well because you have to learn a bunch of other stuff that other people have to do. For instance, you're going to have to learn how an animation pipeline works. You're going to have to learn how the combat systems work. You're going to have to learn the traversal systems and level design and all these other things. And sometimes you're going to have to work with engineers. And so you might have to learn a little bit of how programming works. You don't necessarily have to know everything. Like you don't have to be an engineer or know how to program a game from scratch, but you have to be able to know how to talk to them. Because they're going to have certain requirements when they're doing their work, and you're going to have requirements when doing your work, and sometimes they don't mesh completely. And so you have to be able to talk to each other and negotiate how you're going to do things and why certain things need to be done. And if you can't do that, then it's going to be really, really hard to get the sound to work right. And so I guess, yeah, willingness and eagerness to learn, I guess, is the second kind of skill. Third skill that people don't really think about, probably time management. Because if you're just kind of working on your own and writing music or doing your own sound design, you kind of have as long as you need. That is not the case in the working world. There are so many deadlines and drop dead dates and so stuff like that that if you don't hit, then sometimes the game will go out and you didn't have audio in it.
Wow. Yeah.
And like that's happened to me even in larger projects. Like you can't always hit everything, and so time management's a huge issue, and sometimes it's really difficult even for companies to get it right because people are, as it turns out, exceedingly bad at predicting how much time something will take.
Yes, very true.
So I like my rule of thumb has kind of been however long I think it's going to take, double that, and then that's how long I say it's going to take. And then if it takes less time than that, then great. But a lot of times it does eat into that extra time that I put in because there are just things that come up that you have no idea were going to be there at the beginning. Like you'll implement a feature or a sound, and then you'll find an edge case of like, oh, well, like if it's like say you have some sort of timer and switch puzzle, you'll implement the sound for the timer counting down, and then you'll implement the sound for the, time's up sound, right? But then maybe like something happened where a door opened on the other side of the level that started a second timer, and then all of a sudden it's interfering with your new timer, and then your sounds mess up. So you need to figure out how to fix that problem, and just like all kinds of stuff will happen, and it'll take time to figure out first what's happening, second why it's happening, and third how do I stop it from happening.
Right. Yeah. So that's so besides those three, I mean, like and that's very important to understand all those things. I mean, usually the deal, of course, is that when you're doing this kind of stuff, and there's a situation where blame can be laid, you obviously want to try to figure out how that blame cannot be laid on the audio team. That the audio team is not going to be responsible for the delay, if possible. That kind of thing. Well,
I kind of have, along with my team, you try and adopt this attitude, I think, as an audio person, and whether it's right or not is kind of a conversation, right? But I've kind of adopted this attitude of, if the audio team is responsible for a delay, then something was broken before it got to the audio team. Because usually when it there well, there's like a meme going on just in the last few days of like it says like, oh, the producer says that we're pushing out the date by a week, so that, you know, whoever has extra time, and the audio person says, so we get an extra week for audio post, right? And we get an extra week for audio post, right? And the dev just doesn't say anything.
And then there's some crickets, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's probably the most common thing to happen is they'll need extra time for art or level design or whatever.
Right.
They'll give them an
usually
extra week.
other than music than audio, basically.
Exactly. So they'll give them an extra week, but then they won't add an extra week for audio because I think what a lot of people don't realize is that audio can't. I mean, we can do some stuff while the other teams are working, but in order to do it really properly, we have to wait until they're done,
right,
before we can even really do a lot of our work.
Right.
Like we've found ways that, you know, as they're working on a feature, we can go in and implement parts of it and then try and fine tune some of it. And then once they're done, then we go polish it up. That's had mixed results. It's always best to have a feature completely done so you know everything about it. Because we've also had features where we do that, implement stuff during the production, and then they add some element to that feature that they don't tell us about in the middle, and we don't know about, so it doesn't get covered.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and then you don't look that good as a result of supposedly missing the ball, which you weren't even told about the fact that there wasn't even a ball to miss.
My favorite example of that is when so a lot of times you'll have builds. So when someone is
by the way, folks, a build is actually like a working application that runs the game, essentially. That's the idea.
Yeah. So basically, if you think about like game development and you're working on it, you're working on a game, you'll usually be in Unity or Unreal. You can just play the game, click play it and see if it's working. Oftentimes, I mean, that is how we work in general, but when a director is looking at a game, usually they'll have a build so that it has all the content from everyone, aggregated into one place, so they can then evaluate it. The problem often becomes when you're working in like an agile development system, or just where everyone's always constantly pushing stuff in, is that the build is just one slice in time. And so we've frequently had an issue where a build will be sent off and we're not told when necessarily this build will be sent off. Cause like they make a build like every hour. And then so a producer just chooses an hour to send off to the directors.
Yeah.
And then they'll play that. And so we've had situations where there will be a bunch of stuff we did just in the last day or week or something that often like addressed criticisms that we got from the directors or problems or bugs that we got from QA or whatever.
Yeah.
But the directors then play a build from right before we put in all those fixes.
Right.
And so they'll be like, we said all this stuff and we found all this stuff wrong with it. And they'll send us a laundry list of all this stuff that's wrong. And we'll get it and be like, but we fixed all of that.
Yeah, but it just didn't make the cutoff.
The
cutoff time.
Yeah. And so that can be really frustrating sometimes, but that just happens.
Right. Okay, cool. So that's an interesting thing. So in terms of one of the things I'm curious about is that as a sound designer, how much of a percentage of your day is given to sound designing versus implementation versus tracking and all the other kind of stuff? Because I mean, that's one of the other things that I would definitely say that asset tracking is like literally one of the things that almost nobody talks about in any school that teaches you about game audio.
It might also be a thing that almost nobody does.
Okay, got it.
Not quite. But like so first the so sound design for me in particular, it's probably only like 20%, if that, and that's between recording, editing, putting effects on stuff in a DAW. Like that's kind of what I consider
In the
sound.
box mixing and stuff like that.
Yeah. Implementation, there are kind of two layers to it. One is actually putting the sounds into the kind of sound cue or the sound object, or whatever tool you're using. And that's kind of a mix of sound design and implementation, because it's like, say you're making a gun sound, you're going to put in the firing sound, the mechanism sound, the tail, and then mix all that together in your middleware. So it's still sort of sound designing, but still implementation. And then there's the like deeper implementation where like you go into a script or you go into code and you put in the line of code that actually plays the sound.
Yeah, call that integration usually. Yeah.
Integration. So I would say that's probably about 75 to 80% of my day. And then kind of asset tracking, that is more on that's kind of, at least for us, it's done more on a high level. The managers are kind of more in charge of that. And it's not like going down an asset list and saying, okay, we got this done, check. We got this done, check. We got this. It's more like, did we implement the music for this level? Or we look through our JIRAs and say, did we complete this feature?
So you just mentioned something that's very important. You just said the word JIRA. Does anybody know, JIRA is something that everybody should be aware of if you don't know anything about it. So JIRA is a task manager. It's very big in huge corporations of different kinds. Doesn't matter. It's well beyond just games, but the idea is that it's a task management software, and it's going to be something that you're likely to be you will want to be familiar with it, because they're going to be using something like this to track all kinds of tasks that need to be done at a game company from in all kinds of departments, basically.
Yeah. And when I said task management doesn't really get done, I think what I meant was in the way that people often think of it from like school. Because when I was in school, often what we would have is a spreadsheet, and it would have a list of all the sounds that we need to make and that we need to implement. And I've never seen that.
No spreadsheets, but there are databases, I would think, right?
Maybe, but like, I mean, for all the sound effects in Avengers, for example, there's no database or spreadsheet saying what all the sounds are. There's no, like we have, I mean, they're all in the repository, but they're not tracked anywhere, right? Because it's very much, when a designer makes something, they put it in Jira and they'll tell us about it.
Yeah.
And then we'll get a task to make audio for it.
And then that's it.
And that's it. Like we don't like keep track of it. And that might be an imperfect system, because there have been times where it's like, I needed to go change that sound. Where was it? Usually we set up our folder and naming structure in a way that makes it really, really easy to find things.
Right.
For example, we'll have folders for specific levels, for specific beats within that level.
Yeah.
And so we'll know if the sound is in that level, go to that level's folder and all that. And if it's like a UI sound, we have a UI folder and then several subfolders. So we try and minimize the need for tracking it any further than that. Right.
So one question I'm curious about is, did you have asset lists and things like that at Disney Interactive in comparison?
I think I did, only because I made them.
Okay, got it.
That was just kind of for my own sake. It's like, okay, what are the needs for this game? I'm going to write down what I think they need, and then I'll go down the list. But it's kind of, I think that it's more useful for smaller projects and here's what it is. It's also useful for freelancers and third-party companies, because they do, I think, need a list of things to do in order to get paid and know how much they're getting paid.
Yeah.
For internal teams, that reason just goes out the window. Because you're on salary, you get paid no matter what. So you're kind of just doing work until there's no more work to do. Because I think that if you had a list and you only did what was on that list, the game would end up sounding fairly empty in big AAA games, because there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of things that you never think about beforehand. Right. You're like, oh, we need all this sound in this area because this feature that they just implemented that we didn't even know was going to exist 2 months ago.
Right. Yeah.
So if we were to stick with a list, then the game wouldn't have much sound, I don't think. Like, it would have like the default sounds, like you would have your Foley and your some combat stuff and some dialogue lines, but there's just so much. The one exception to this that I have seen spreadsheets used for quite often is dialogue.
Okay.
And that's just because that's how VO artists record, is they have a spreadsheet printed out and they just go line by line. Right. And so all of the dialogue tracking is done in spreadsheets. We have other tools on top of it that, like, the dialogue stuff is done in, and then it exports that to a spreadsheet. Right. So we don't actually enter the data into spreadsheet. It's all
automatically sort of like, imported in, essentially.
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, so I'm gonna basically start opening it up for questions, but I do want to sort of announce a couple of things. Of course, we are the Game Audio Institute. We teach classes in game audio and stuff like that, and we actually do have a class that is opening up in the July that's actually going to be covering some of the basics of VR and AR audio. I'll just sort of briefly share my screen here. 1 second. And just see here. Okay, so and so it's going to be starting on July the 12th to August 30th, and it basically covers a lot of stuff about VR and AR audio concepts and practice. A lot of the times people are really excited about VR and AR audio, but they actually don't know anything about game audio. So therefore, this class will also teach you a little bit about just general game audio as well, interactive audio in general. So if you want to check that out, we have links on our website, gameaudioinstitute.com. And I can post that into the chat there, so you have that. So I don't know why it's not really copying that, but there we go. And I can paste that in the chat a little bit, and then actually I'll give you the actual link here to the main web page. And we have a little bit of stuff about it basically runs for 8 weeks, and we're going to have 5 in-person Zoom meetings on this whole thing. And the price is basically $4.99, and we have sort of limited enrollment. We're probably limiting it to about 10 students total, and but enrollment is open at this point in time. So if you're interested in checking it out, let us know, and we can put you on the list there. And with that, I will stop the screen sharing, and we'll just go into some questions for everybody. And actually, if you have the ability to open your screen or whatever like that, that'd be cool. Take a little screenshot, so see all the happy faces of people. So if you can turn on your video and stuff, that'd be cool. And yep, hi. All right, Brian, do you have a camera?
Yeah, no camera, but
okay.
Not on this. I'm using a desktop. I'm using like a separate monitor. I don't have my laptop open.
Cool.
With the camera, so.
Good. All right, right.
But yeah.
AG, are you there? AG, are you there? Okay, he's not there at the moment. All right, so I will. I'll so everyone say 3, 2, 1, cheese. Oh God, there he is, Steve. Now, okay, one more time. Okay, cool, awesome. All right, well, gotta do the publicity. I'm horrible at this sort of stuff. I usually need somebody else to do this kind of stuff. But anyway, the course I think is gameaudioinstitute.com, and actually it's courses. think that's correct. And then we can just probably go there from that point. Let me just make sure if that's the right email address. Just making sure. Yeah, that's the one. Just making sure. All right, I'll paste that in the chat, and then we'll go right to questions. And that's to everyone in the meeting. So there you go. And of course, we've got all kinds of ads on Facebook and things like that we've been running, and also our Game Audio Institute Facebook page and stuff like that. So anyway, so open it up. Any questions you want to ask our Game Audio professional?
I think Brian had one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm asking if you said integration is a huge part of your day, 75, 80%, and recording in DAW and composing and stuff like that is about 20. Can you walk us through some of the the scripting details that and languages that you use? And in addition to that, when you're composing, and are you kind of like the final mixer, and are you the one that's completing your audio basically? Like, are you mixing and mastering it at the end of the day, or do you have somebody else doing that?
Right. Yeah, I'll go through all that.
Thanks.
So in terms of integration, so we don't use, so we use our own proprietary engine called Foundation, and that has a visual scripting language. So I use that a lot of the time. But for the purposes of kind of talking about things, I'll try and translate everything into kind of Unreal terms when it comes to visual scripting. I mean, it's pretty much the same as Blueprints. It has nodes and things you connect lines to do stuff. So oftentimes it'll be a designer they'll have a feature. They'll make a request for audio for the feature, and sometimes we'll have a meeting with them and discuss what the needs are. And that I'll write down like a quick list of things that I think it'll need. And then I'll ask them questions like, where is this object? Where does it live in the game engine? Can you give me a test gem to run it and test it out, so that I don't have to run through a whole level and fight thousands of enemies just to get to it. That is a big part. Sometimes you do have to run through the level and find the thing you're looking for, and it takes
fight enemies and stuff.
Yeah, and it takes so long. And then we have like debug tools to instantly kill all the enemies and to skew, cheat, or no clip around the level. But still, it can take a lot of time just to test something. So I'll get all that information and then find, what like blueprint the object uses. If it's animated, I'll go into the animation to add sound sometimes. And then I'll just place a node to play a sound. And that's generally, what you do for the main features of the game. But then for UI, all of that, at least in our game, was done through code. So I actually go into C++ files, and I'll find, the methods in there that I need to play the sound on. Like, just for instance, there's a method for when you scroll over. So we have a free cursor. So there's a method for when you scroll over something that's clickable, and it like highlights it. So there's like a little highlight sound that I put in there. Or when you press a button to select it, or press a different button to cancel, then I'll play the select or cancel sound there. And so there's a little bit of logic that you have to do in there. Sometimes, like, say you're equipping an item, so you'll see the item there, and when you select it and it's unequipped, you want to play the equip sound. But if you select it and it's equipped, then you want to play a different sound that makes it clear that you're not re-equipping it. And so you have to do little if statements every once in a while, but nothing like too extremely complicated. I think the most complicated thing I've had to do in code for Avengers was we have a little signal detector that as you get closer or further away, it beeps faster or slower. And so I made a little bit of code that detects if you're within a certain distance of the signal, and then it starts the beeping sound. And if you're moving towards it, it plays one beeping sound. And if you're moving away from it, it plays a more negative beeping sound so that you can audibly hear if you're getting closer or further away. And that was probably the most complicated one. Anything more complicated than that, usually engineers take over or have already made systems for.
Right.
But that's all done in C++. And that would be the same in Unreal too. You can use C++ files to make gameplay stuff. In Unity, it would be different. It would be C#.
Just a follow up, and have you do you encounter situations in which you have to then talk to programmers and say that you need to implement this because we can't do this with the system that we have right now?
100%.
Yeah.
I can give probably an example. We wanted to automate it so that if you got a certain distance away from a character who is talking, that it changed the voice to go over the radio.
Oh, nice.
Usually, if we were using something like Wise, that would be pretty trivial to do. But we're actually not using Wise. We're using our own proprietary tools. So because that was never needed on previous games, that feature was never implemented.
Right.
And so since we needed that, we had to talk to the programmers and say, hey, just do a distance check. And if we're far enough away, change the routing of the sound so that it goes into this channel that has the radio FUTS effect on it and all that. And then when we get closer, put it back into the original bus. And so, yeah, so that was something that like we couldn't do ourselves. I might have been able to if I had spent like a month or two studying all the systems that
You don't have the time. You're on deadlines. And
I don't have the time to do that.
Yeah.
So even though I have the ability to do that, I don't have the time to do that. So a programmer who knows the dialogue system and knows all the character systems is going to be able to do that in like a day.
Right.
So we had them, implement that. One place that we did ask for help, but I also was able to kind of dig into was we have this system where it kind of automatically detects how a body is moving. So if an arm goes up or down or the foot moves or whatever, it detects that and then plays a sound for the appropriate body part. We put the arm sounds and then the leg sounds and stuff like that. So it basically automated fully. And there were some features that I wanted in there that I actually knew enough about it because I had been kind of studying it over several months while setting everything up. So I was actually go into the code and change a few things and to get it working better and to fix a few problems I saw with it. We also had another programmer coming in and fixing other aspects of it and upgrading it, but I was able to go in and do a little work there as well.
Yeah. So that's excellent. Thanks for that question. That was fantastic, Brian. Anyone else? Oh, by the way, comment.
Sorry, he had a second part to the question that
so was that? Okay.
Yeah. The follow-up was kind of like, are you in charge of mixing and mastering your own work?
Right. So yes and no. There's kind of there's 3 stages of mixing, right? So there's when you're in the DAW, kind of using compression and maybe some effects or whatever, right? Then there's when you get it into the game engine, it will sound completely different. And so when you're say you're like constructing the sound in Wise in the sound object, and you have like your I forgot what they're called in Wise, blend containers. And you're basically mixing there because you're having all of your different elements at different levels and you bring them up or down. When you play them in the game, since they sound different, you need to be authoring them live so that it sounds the way you want it to. So that's the kind of the second level of mixing that you do. And then you also like hear how it sounds in the environment that you are putting it in, and then you'll make changes to it based on that. And then sometimes you'll go to the other sounds, oh, those are a little too loud or whatever. So there's some mixing there. But then the third stage of mixing, I usually don't do. That is usually our director. He's kind of the final mix engineer. and he'll go in and level by level listen to it at reference, make sure all the dialogue is in the correct volume level we want it, and then based on the dialogue, then he'll change the music, and then he'll change the other sounds to kind of mix everything around the VO so that it all has a nice mix. And then he'll do things like put in reverb and other effects as needed. And he has the whole routing structure that he uses to make everything sound really good. And then we will do things to kind of automate mixing. For example, one of the biggest issues we had was on the combat side, when you had a bunch of enemies, a bunch of heroes all hitting each other at the same time. The mix just got real muddy at the very beginning. And so we did a lot of things to say, when there's, 10 enemies do this, when there's 20 enemies do this, when there's 30 enemies do this. We had different kind of mixed states that would change like the volumes of the enemy sounds and the hero sounds and the environment sounds. Usually we got to the point where in combat, we just turned the environment sounds off. Like there's no wind, no trees, no water, no rain, no anything when you're in combat, unless it's against like one enemy.
Yeah.
So because you just have all this sound and you need to focus your attention somewhere. And so we would do things like increasing the player's volume and decreasing all the enemies' volumes when you had too many enemies. So that's kind of, I guess, a fourth level of mixing so there's the DAW in your sounds in the middleware itself, the kind of automated mixing stuff, and then the final mix that our director does.
Cool.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Comment Jalabert? Is that how I pronounce you? And I'm not hearing you at the moment. Is that better?
Don't hear it.
Yes, I can hear you now. I think. Try it
No.
again. Not hearing anything. So no audio, unfortunately.
You can
You
type
want-
your question.
You can type it in the chat if you want to. Where are you anyway? Are you coming? You're from France, yeah? Yeah, got it. Ask a question. So
Yes.
Yes.
We do extremely often have limitations. And usually it's based on the console. So it's based on a couple things. One is based on the console, but two, it's based on how much we can convince the lead engineers that we need for the game. Because they have to deal with memory budgets for every aspect of the game. So, art gets a memory budget, sound gets a memory budget, combat gets a memory budget, levels get a memory budget. Like everything has a memory budget.
And a processor budget too, right?
You what?
A processor budget too, I would think.
Processor. I don't know as much about that as the memory stuff, but everything has a budget. Even to the point where in efforts to preserve their memory budget and keep as much to them as they can, I've seen art in the levels that is temporary that has text on it saying preserved for memory so that no one else steals their memory budget.
I told you that story about Burke Trieschman, using up all the audio budget with a snare sound so that nobody would take any of his budget away on an SNES game. Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
So we were dealing with probably a memory budget of 45-ish megabytes. So we could not have more than 45 megabytes of sound loaded in memory at any given time. which sounds pretty minuscule when you think about like how computers have 8, 16, 32, 64 gigabytes of RAM. But
the you know, the console can do like 512 voices at once technically if
Exactly.
you wanted it to.
yeah, and but the reality is that I think, I don't know, PlayStation 4 had like 2 or 4 gigabytes. I don't remember how many gigabytes, but the consoles never have as much as a PC. And so you have to fit an entire game into that whatever physical budget you have.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, sound often gets lower budgets because it doesn't always need as much budget as art does. Usually art needs the most budget because as processors and consoles get more powerful, you get higher visual fidelity. That takes more RAM. And that's what sells games, to be really honest, is visuals usually are the number one sellers of games.
Yeah.
And so we usually get a tiny budget. And so you have to really, really think about how are you going to structure your game so that you get all the sounds that you need and it's not going to blow the budget. And while 45 megabytes might not sound like a lot, and actually it's not, like we usually hit it pretty hard and get really close to it, we do a lot of stuff to, like a lot of trickery to make sure that we don't get that high. So one of the biggest saving is make as many sounds mono as you can. Just kind of as a rule, almost everything in the game is mono. There are like music and stuff that is streamed that doesn't need to be saved into RAM, that can be stereo. But every once in a while there'll be a RAM sound that we do want stereo, but that's definitely the exception. Another way we deal with it is make the sounds as short as we can while retaining the kind of sonic and artistic integrity of it. So we kind of had a rule where anything past 5 seconds and really anything past 3 or 4 seconds, but 5 was the definite cutoff, needed to be a streamed sound instead of RAM sound. Because just the longer the sound is, the more RAM it's going to take up. Then we would go through really severe and extensive process of figuring out how to load and unload sounds. So in Wise, you would have sound banks, right? And so you would, when a sound bank is loaded, all of those sounds are loaded into memory. And so you would have to have a manager that figures out when certain sound banks are loaded. So if we had a sound bank for a specific character and that character is not on screen, then we would not load those sounds and we wouldn't have to worry about them. And that freed up space for another character or for another environment or something like that. So by kind of figuring out how levels are structured and then loading and unloading sounds as you need them, then you can stay pretty much under the memory budget. Another thing we would do is because we would have so many different variations of one sound. So if you just take an example of like a footstep, you would have like 10, 15, 20 different footstep sounds. What we would say is we would have a program, a little bit of code running that says, if we're hitting up towards the top of the memory budget, if we have 20 sounds in this list of sounds we can play, we're going to cut that down to 15 so that a few other sounds can play in. And if we're getting even higher towards that memory budget, we'll cut that down to 10. And if we're like really up against that memory budget for this one footstep sound, we'll cut that down to 5 variations of that sound. Nice. So you would get less and less of one specific sound, in terms of variations, but you would allow more different sounds that needed to play to actually appear in the game. And so that's how we kept the kind of sonic integrity of the game always feeling complete. So you get less detail, but more breadth. But then as you get into less intensive areas of the game where less sounds are playing, you start getting more detail.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, that's a great question, Coleman. one question I'm curious about: did you run profiling? Profiling?
Yeah. So we don't. So we don't use Wise. So we didn't get the Wise profiler, but we had our own version.
Yeah.
And so we would have a bunch of debug things that showed things on screen of how many voices you're using, how much CPU that's using, how much RAM that's using, how many streams are currently playing, how many virtual voices are currently playing. We would have things that would debug, like the volume of everything, where the sounds were in 3D space.
Yeah.
And we could use all that to figure out what kind of the problems were. And then, a lot of the times the problems were there were voices that were playing that we didn't know were playing and that we needed to go and turn off. Right.
Right.
And so that would save on RAM, that would save on voice count, and a lot of things like that.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Profiling is very important. It's not often taught in schools or anything like that, with middleware and stuff. All right. Anyway, any more questions, please? Anyone has more questions to ask? Feel free. Sam, Miles, anyone?
I'll just keep asking questions if you don't.
Okay, because I know Brian's
right.
got a lot.
Yeah. So are you somebody that goes out, captures Foley? Like, are you going out into the field and doing that sort of thing? Where are you going?
Yeah, actually, so 2 or 3 weeks ago, I went out to a place called Huddart Park over near me. I live in San Carlos area. Yeah. It was a great place to capture footsteps for certain things. So we were capturing a lot of footsteps because they have a sand volleyball pit. So we were getting sand footsteps. They had a field of grass. We were getting sands. There was even a turkey that we gobbled at, and it gobbled. So we recorded that. And then we hiked down into the kind of valley and found a river where we got a lot of water stuff, and or it was really more of a creek, but so we got a bunch of different surface materials there, and so that was really fun. I'm not usually like the most experienced in recording. My direct manager is, and so he was the one who brought the recording gear and the shotgun mics and all that. He's kind of in charge of that. So, but it was super fun. And then recently we were actually at his place, and he had his subwoofer that he had set up and turned it so that the speaker cone was facing up, and we were just putting stuff on top of it, running a synth to try and vibrate things, and we were getting like the coolest sounds of like things like just bouncing up and down and resonating. And at one point we put an acoustic guitar on there, and then like slowly swept the frequency up to start resonating all the strings, and doing some cool stuff like that. So just stuff that we're going to use not for Foley, but for just like weird, like designed sounds and stuff like that.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. Sounds like an Alvin Lucier piece, because he did a piece where he had like sense of feedback, and they placed things on speaker cones, and then they would just sort of jangle while he was like, thinking of stuff. It was weird.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
Brennan, I have a question.
Yep.
Since there aren't any other questions right now, since this talk is exploding common myths in game audio, I was going to ask Brennan, as someone who went from, working on the mobile side and working with Disney Interactive to working in AAA games, how has that transition been for you? I mean, since I know you very well, so I'll preface this question by saying that I know that it was always your dream to work on AAA titles. How's that worked out?
I think it's worked out great. The transition itself was fairly smooth, I guess. What I didn't expect, I expected there to be more work in AAA games. What I didn't expect was kind of how people thought about the work. I think when you're working for 6 months on a project, you have a very different view on how the work happens and how it should happen than if you're spending 6 years on a project. And I remember being totally awestruck by my teammates when I first got there of how in depth and how detailed their thinking was for every little sound. Because coming from a world where things are much more fast paced, you have much shorter timelines. It's like, yeah, okay, UI, it's a little tick or a little bleep, get it done, put it in there, or like just some little nonsense sound that maybe doesn't matter, like just like get it done and in there, and then move on to kind of more important stuff.
Yeah.
But I remember it on Avengers. I think the first week I got there, I don't know if any of you've played the game, but there's a scene where Tony Stark is flying up into space, and he's encounters a like lightning storm, and the wind is blowing him, lightning's hitting him, and he's having to steer around things and get up into space. And when I first got there, they were working on that scene, and I remember them having a 30-minute conversation, an hour conversation about how the beeps should escalate, like from his suit that's giving warnings as wind is hitting him, when he's drifting off course, like how far off course he needs to be before the beeping kind of gets louder and gets more distorted, and then like when you get into the center, like how it calms back down, and you play a tone, and like they're just all these different things they were thinking about. I never would have thought to think about, because I didn't have the luxury of time. Now it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? If you have that much time, sometimes it can get away from you, but just like kind of having that space to dig in and dive in was really interesting to see, like just how much thought goes into every little part of a game. And I mean, it's not just in audio. It's like you can talk to anybody in the office about the smallest thing in the game, and there's so much thought that goes into it. There's a reason for everything, right? And it's just the level, the caliber and the level that you have to be at for AAA games is just so incredibly high, I think. And that's not to say that like other like indie games or mobile games are not like of high quality. It's just that I think the attention goes into different places.
Right. And the other thing is that you don't have enough time to spend, literally thinking about how Tony Stark is going to be like, X degrees off course and whatever like that, because you don't have the time in terms of the development time in general.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah. Did you have a question? Yeah. Come on.
Oh, my absolute reference. So in general or in terms of Avengers specifically? In general. So, well, I'll give both answers. But so in general, my absolute sound reference changes depending on the genre. I mean, it has to, right? You can't just say one game has the best sound of any game out there, because a real-time strategy is going to have completely different needs from like a first-person shooter. So my favorite game sound-wise is probably still Breath of the Wild. I just go back to that for so many different things. But in terms of like for Avengers, what we did was we were looking at every game that was kind of similar to it. So we're looking at Horizon Zero Dawn and God of War were two of the big ones that we went back to. And so even to the point where we would do a recording session of 30 minutes of our game. We would record 30 minutes of God of War and 30 minutes of Horizon, and then compare them in terms of volume level and mix and all that, but also just like going and finding similar games that have really cool sound design. And we would do Spider-Man, I think, was another one, especially for for the superhero kind of stuff. I think Batman as well. So like we listen to like the kinds of sounds that they would have, and then that would definitely influence our choices and our designs. So it really just depends on the kind of game you're making. You want to, reference similar games that are well received.
Yeah. All right, excellent. So one last thing I did want to announce. We're getting close to. I mean, technically we're afternoon, but we can take one more question, I think. But I did want to say beforehand one more thing, and I will share my screen briefly. We have one more talk coming up. Again, we'll have more. I'm sure to announce at that point. But this will be the one that's coming up in June. This will be June 19th, same time. On Saturday. This time we're going to have Rich Vreeland, aka Disaster Piece. He's the composer for Fez, Hyper Light Drifter, Mini Metro, Solar Ash Kingdom. He's really, really, really interested in things like generative audio and procedural generative music and procedural music and stuff like that. Super geeky. It'll be a fun time for sure. He's definitely got some amazing thoughts about how to create audio, and he's been in the business now for quite some time at this point, and he's really awesome. So don't miss that one if you can. That's going to be June 19th. And technically, in the GAI website, the SpeedRun is a SpeedRun is a SpeedRun. So technically, if you bought a SpeedRun, you can get into the next SpeedRun talk. It'll be the same length pretty much. But if anyone else wants to get into this, tell your friends and whatever like that, because he's an awesome composer, has some really great thoughts about this whole sort of stuff. Okay, so that's basically all I needed to say about that. We can take probably one more question, and then I think we'll end it for now. Anyone else want to ask a question? Shankar in India, are you there?
Steve might have another question.
What do you say? Oh, I'm sorry. You're kind of breaking up there. You can type you can type your question in the chat. You're calling from India, I'm pretty sure. Yes.
Yeah, Shankar from India.
Yeah. You can either ask a question in the chat if you want to type it
Yes,
there.
yes. Yeah, is it clear? My voice is clear?
It's a little bit muffled. Yeah, and I think it kind of breaks up a bit. So.
Okay, I will type it.
Yeah, it might be good. So we'll answer this last question here, and then I think we'll end for now. But super great. I think there's been some great questions and stuff like that. Yes, there we go. Snap.
Thank you. I have a question. What do you think I'm drinking? Is this whiskey, apple juice, tea? What do you think?
Apple juice.
It's not beer, I don't think. It doesn't look.
Oh, it could be beer.
It could be beer.
I mean, we have people from India, so I'm sure it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
It's more like 1 a.m. in India, if nothing else.
Well.
Oh, here we go. What are different stages in game audio production?
Yeah. So
pretty good one.
Generally, these stages kind of also follow the stages of game production in general. You have at the very start your pre-production stage, which in terms of audio is going to mean probably a lot of rapid iteration and rapid implementation and integration, usually of temp sounds. Just because like you'll usually have a bunch of sounds from the previous game or just from a library or something, stuff that's not unique to your project at all, that's just to get sounds in to make sure that systems are working and things are gonna kind of all play nicely together. And during that time, you'll also probably be doing a lot of recording and a lot of field recording and just like getting ambiances and Foley and random things just to add to your library, that stuff that you're going to need. There's usually a planning phase, and we know we're going to need a bunch of Foley. We know we're going to need a bunch of ambiances for these kinds of locations. So we'll go scout those locations and find them, record them. And if we can't, then we'll find a library or stuff. For instance, on a project, we needed birds from an African region. we didn't really have the budget to go out to Africa and record birds, so we just bought a library for that.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of that and a lot of planning, a lot of talking to people, figuring out what exactly the game's going to be, what it's going to need. And that usually lasts a year or two. And then you move into your production, which they start getting actual levels built, and they start getting the actual characters and animations in. So then you can start actually putting in the real sounds and start to fill the worlds with the ambiences that they're going to need. That takes several years. And then and a lot of the time is focused just on getting the stuff in and getting it sounding good, but getting it in. And then usually, sometimes it's level by level. You'll go through kind of the mixing stage where you'll have all the content in, and it'll kind of be mixed okay, but you really want to do that final pass on it. And then there's just a bunch of polish at the end. There's like, oh, this animation has the footsteps off just by a little bit, or it can use an extra whoosh when they're swinging their arm, or blah, blah, blah. But then there's just like a bunch of stuff all throughout all of those cycles that don't really land in any one place. For instance, music, that kind of just depends on when the composer finishes the music, and then we can start implementing it. There's dialogue, which happens throughout. Usually there's a temp stage. Well, first there's the writing stage, which we have robo-generated VO, and then we record temp VO, and then towards the end, we'll start recording pro VO. But there's a lot of time where there's some scenes with some pro, some temp, and some robo, like all like throughout, because you know they'll often change lines, and we'll have to go and re-record stuff, and it'll all, you know. So, and then there's generally a big cleanup phase too, to make sure we don't have any robo VO in the game.
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Those are fun moments, right?
Right. Yeah. When you're like at the
Let's get those
apex.
people.
Yeah, exactly. You're at the apex of the final scene, and all of a sudden the villain just says like a line in robo. Like, those have been fun. There have been times where like, you know, like we'll hear our voices for the longest time in the game until like the very end when we finally remove it, just because of the temp stuff. And and then yeah, so like just between sound effects, VO, and music, there's a lot of different things, and it's hard to really nail down. Like you can't just say, okay, this week we're going to do all the VO, this week we're going to do all the music. It's a lot more interspersed.
Yeah. So AG actually asked a question saying, what's the normal time period from conception to completion for most AAA games?
Yeah, I would say the tendency is between 5 to 7 years now.
Yeah, I was going to say 6, something like that.
I think it's too long. I think games should be shorter and should take less time to make, personally. But yeah, generally, the studio will have the idea, like you'll have directors that come up with the ideas and stuff, and then you'll do prototypes probably for a few months, and then if it gets greenlit and they decide they really want to make a game out of it, they'll take about a year or two to do pre-production, and then usually pre-production is a smaller team, so you'll have your main team is probably working on a different game like that's further in production or is just finishing up, and then you'll have another game starting up in pre-production with like a team of like 10 or 15 people, and then you get to full production when the big team migrates over, when the previous game releases. So yeah, any audio standards? Yeah, there are some audio standards. So usually we try to adhere to broadcast standards in terms of sound levels. And so usually that means
like LUFS, right? I mean,
yeah, LUFS. And so we'll try and make like we'll mix all the VO at like -18 and then mix everything around that so that you have a general -24. That's kind of the standard we do. The other standard is that we make sure VO is where it needs to be first before we mix everything else around it. Because if it's a story-driven game, especially, you want your VO to be the main focus. In terms of like audio formats, there's no real standard there, just mostly WAV files. But then the game might compress them to OGG-Vorbis files when it packages the game. You can kind of choose several different formats there, but not anything too crazy.
Yeah, I remember asking Russell Brower how he was managed to fit 41 hours of music into World of Warcraft, and he said MP3. Basically.
We try not to use MP3s anymore.
Yeah,
but
I figured as much. Yeah,
depends.
Yeah, OGG-Vorbis is better for that situation, but still not perfect either way. All right, so that's cool. All right, I hope everybody enjoyed yourselves. I certainly enjoyed listening to and getting enlightened. Yes, thank you very much. I agree. We'll all do the beatnik clapping. It's all beatnik clapping. That's what it is. Anyway, so that's cool. And stay tuned for more of this. Right, the next one's coming up in June 19th with Rich Freeland, and I'm sure we'll have lots and lots of people asking questions for that. So just want to thank Brennan for coming out and saying awesome, great things. Yes, awesome.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I'm sure we'll have him back again at another time because he has lots to say. So that's I think that's about it for now. We're at 12:15. So yeah, thanks Shankar. Cool. It's very cool. Thanks for your questions.
All right.
And as I said, we've got a course happening in July. If you want to know more information about it, go to the Game Audio Institute website or our Facebook page and ask questions or anything. We'll be happy to help you out. All right?
Thank you.
Cool. Take care.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks.
And all right.
And then there were two.
Wow, Brennan didn't even stay. That's odd.
Yeah, Brennan. Yeah, no, he did a great job. That was awesome.
Yeah, it was good. I figured it was gonna go after an hour. I just figured like you were like, oh, it's gonna be an hour. No way, dude. It's gonna be so over an hour. There's no question.
I think an hour is perfect, really.
But it was an hour. No, because the problem is that it takes a longer time to answer the question fully. It does.
Oh, no, I know, but I mean, it's only an hour 15.
Well, but an hour and 15 is still more than an hour.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. I cannot have that argument with you. I will lose.
We just didn't we didn't get it at 12:59 and be like, okay, that's it, we're done. Or let's 59.
No, I didn't figure it would be like that, but I think the hour format is really good. It keeps it poppy.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's a 2-hour format. I never said that either.
It might be. So, Scott, you did a great job. That was awesome.
Right.
I was thinking might be cool for the next one with Rich is to have him play some music or demo a game with music or actually have him play some stuff for people. Like let him do a little bit of a like Brennan did presentation, but include some Rich, some of his music and stuff. And
sure, I can totally do that. I definitely want to touch base with him beforehand to go like, okay, what kind of format will you be comfortable with? That kind of thing.
Yeah, and ask him if he wants to do that. Maybe just whatever his favorite, whatever he wants to play for people, the demo for them, 5 minutes worth.
Well, yeah, I definitely would like to, and there's certainly things that I would like to see him demo myself. Like I would like to see him demo, for example, Mini Metro.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a super awesome generative experience that is also very cool and musical.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good stuff. Anyway, we're currently recording, so I guess I should stop this so I can edit this.